Ja. Herzlich willkommen. Darf ich um Ihre Aufmerksamkeit bitten? Der Saal hat einen guten Klang jetzt schon. Ich hoffe, das bleibt bis zum Schluss so. Herzlich willkommen. Mein Name ist Kühn. Ich darf Sie begrüßen zum heutigen Abendvortrag von Umberto Napolitano, auch im Namen von Tina Gregoritsch, die eigentlich heute die Moderation hätte machen sollen, aber in Ljubljana hängen geblieben ist. Deswegen schöne Grüße von ihr, aber sie kann nicht persönlich dabei sein. And now I will switch to English for a short introduction of Umberto, which is probably not necessary for the audience, but it's part of the procedure and the tradition. Umberto Napolitano is one of the founders of LAN architecture, together with Benoit Jallon. It's 20 years, so you're celebrating 20 years of LAN this year. 2002 was the foundation of the office. And the office did a lot of very diverse projects in terms of building typology, reaching from offices, housing, to more exotic fields like a prison, a theater, which is not looking like a prison, but it could be a prison because you're critical about typological constraints, as far as I have understood, and also working with you at the TU. The office also has a research branch since 2019, which has a very interesting title, which I have to read. A laboratory dedicated to architecture and reality, RAAR. And it deals with the way reality acts on architecture and architecture acts on reality. We are quite used to the position of we are acting on reality. The other way around, we're not as reflective, I believe. So how does life, how does reality act on architecture? The most logical and straightforward idea is function. So function is the way that reality acts on architecture. And I believe that the aim of this research laboratory is to twist this a little bit, to not accept this restriction to function, but to go beyond. And this anti-functionalist attitude can maybe be traced back, we can discuss this later, to figures of the early modern, like Adolf Behne, who wrote a book on the moderne Zweckbau in the early 1920s, where he distinguished between the rationalist and the functionalist. And he said that the functionalist is treating architecture, is treating the house as a tool, while the rationalist, which is only irritating at first glance, he writes, regards the house as a toy. So he speaks of Werkzeug and Spielzeug, which is very interesting. And I think one can trace back Lahn's interest in rules to this attitude towards the house and architecture as a game where architecture can make its own rules. So architecture can set its own foundations, make its own rules. And this leads to something I did not mention about the work of Lahn, the publication work, which probably made them really world famous, beginning with the Haussmann exhibition, research, and the very old-fashioned medium of the book, which was a big success for good reasons. And we had it at the department, and everybody wanted to have this book and have a look at the research methods, at the research attitude that is represented. And there's a second book out now on Napoli Supermodern, which is quite different to Haussmann, but also a very interesting approach towards architectural research. So I'm looking forward to a playful presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I forget these German things. I like it. Okay. I discovered that the school do not pay license for the software, so I could not insert my JPEG in this one. Thank you for that. You said almost everything of my first 5 minutes of the lecture. So as Christian introduced us, we started 20 years ago. At the time I was very young. I was 26, 27, just out from the school. And we were lucky enough to do more than, today, more than 200 projects, extremely different in terms of sites, typology, type of climate, type of client, type of situation. This is a diagram showing the ongoing project, which goes from 100 meters square to more than 100,000 meters square. The studio is totally European in the sense that I am Italian and Benoit is French. And we really take care of creating a kind of cultural context in the studio where everyone around Europe can come and bring their own part. So it's like literally we have ratio of nationality and we take care of this day-by-day creation of an European culture through the possibility we have. So half of the studio it's French, the other half it's coming from all around Europe, and it comes any change, and that's funny. And this is a map that we redo every year or every 2 years, where all the people of the studio constitute this kind of meta territory. Probably what has not been said, it's the fact that the most important credo, the majority of our project work in an urban context, and even when it's not urban, it's considered as an urban context. And we really have this strong belief between the architecture and the city, or the architecture and the, let's say, the large picture where a project works in. So I start all my lecture quoting Aldo Rossi, these 5 lines from Architecture of the City that I suppose all of you have read, I hope, which is: the architecture of city summarizes the city forms, and from this form we can consider the city problems. By architecture of the city, we mean 2 different things. First, the city seen a gigantic man-made object, a work of engineering and architecture that is large and complex and growing over time. Second, certain more limited but still crucial aspect of the city, namely urban fact, which, like the city itself, are characterized by their own history and thus by their own form. What Aldo Rossi said is very simple. It's city is an hand-made object. City is something that you can scientifically approach, you can understand, you can measure, you can really get into an approach where you try to even to give a weight to the things. So the city is something that you, as an architect, you have really to understand in a very objective way. And city is also a jump in a very subjective territory, which is a cultural fact. Each of us come from a specific city. I am Italian, I come from Naples, which means that I come from this man-made object, from this bunch of stone that give me an identity. So this relationship between the moment where the city has, we can look at the city in a very objective way, and the moment where the city becomes a cultural fact, it's all the spectrum that as an architect you should understand. And it's the moment where at certain point it becomes subjective. And in LAN, what we try to do, it's really to work this both sides, in a certain sense, try to, and that's the research lab, try to get into the city in a very scientific way. So we measure, we compare, we analyze. It has been done with the Haussmann project, which was literally we redraw entirely Paris. We start to classify, to compare it, to really try to get in this handmade object. And then in the other side, that was the first times we had this method. And in the other side, we start also to have our own vision in what is contemporary, what is life around us, what the society expect, what the real expect, to kind of make through each project the bet for the future. That's the very complex part in architecture, is that without any, for me, doubt, architecture is a politic act. Each project is a piece of the world we would like to live in. And so in that sense, we really, as an architect, we engage in this 2 dimension, which is the world we would like to live in, and how to recompose, as an archaeologist, a traces of this future world, how describe it, which are the words we want to use for that, and then in the other side, how to do that through architecture and through the built act that we face every day. So that was the exhibition that has been transformed in this book, which I am very proud of because we are in the 5th edition of the book, 70,000 copy, which is kind of a record for an architectural book, and it's horrible for a novel. And now we are going with this project, Naples Super Modern, and it's I'm just advertising it because the exhibition opened last week in Basel. So if you pass by Basel, it stays until end of August. Those are pictures of the space, and it's a nice project on modernity and identity in this project. So today I would like to approach the different project I want to share with you through 2 angles. One is, which are words that we really use as our daily bread in the office. One is the form, and the other one is the limit. For form, I would share with you this 4 line of Paul Klee in the Nature of the Nature that say that form must on no account ever been as considered as something to be go over with, as a result, as an end, but rather as a genesis grow essence. Form, the way we use the word form, it's very close to the word formation. It's something that is not an end. So the French expression mise en forme is the opposite of what we believe. What we believe is the fact that form, especially in architecture, they are a beginning of a story. They are the result of one path, which is the conception, and they are the beginning of a new story, which is this story that starts with the autonomy of this form and the way this form is used, the way this form changes with the society, with the city, and that give to the potential to face the changing of the time. So the word form is not an end, architecture is not an end, but is a beginning of an history. In that sense, I will share with you 2 experiences. One that we had, which can explain this idea of the forms in movement, form that has the potential to move or to evolve or to be transformed by the users. One, it's in Bègle. Bègle is very close to Bordeaux. That's the train station of Bordeaux, very famous French city for the wine, but is also an extremely active center which are really creating the southeast modern capital of France. So it's very active, and Bordeaux was part of this large territorial project. Bègle, especially the district where we were engaged, is part of this after-war reconstruction of Europe, where the modern was the dogma to follow. And this district, Terre-Neuve, follows exactly the same diagram that you know of the modern city, where the building stands alone in a paradise of garden and huge voids and space. In France, that has been a failure in a certain sense, which is really related to the fact that the void has no status. People don't know what is private, what is public, what is collective. So in a certain sense, it becomes a space where in 2005, I'm sure that you are aware of that, there was riot everywhere, and one of the places of this riot was this district that really get burned and against something, let's say. And those are images of that time. 2008, this man came, which was the mayor of the city, but also the president of the Green Party in France at the time, which was like the avant-garde of the ecologists of today. And he's Noël Mamère, and he did 2 things. One was to connect Bègle to the center, and the second one was to destroy entirely this district. I'm not saying that it's the solution, but that was the point where we get engaged in the project. That was kind of welcomed by the citizen in a specific, singular way. And on this bunch of stone, they asked to a Dutch studio to do a master plan. So we arrived at the point when the master plan was there, and we were asked for these 3 buildings in a competition. At the time, I was 29 years old, which means that I was very, very young. And in a certain sense, totally out of the reality. So to answer to that, So these two diagrams are nice because the idea of the master plan was that each building has to be a mass, has to have a certain proportion, and through the building they had to define the street, like all the European historical city. The building, it's the moment where the public starts and the private stops. The facade of the building, it's in the same time the expression of a certain habitat, but is also the facade of the street. So the idea of the master plan was very easy. Let's use these three blocks to define the public space, which is a bit the opposite of the modern city, where the units are units, etc., etc. So there was a project of street, and the building were related to the streets by their own sites, by their own distance with the streets, and by the fact that they were expecting a work on the facade to define this public space. But 2008 came, and we were asked for half of the surface. People, I mean, it was the subprime crisis. The investor in France, they decided to do not take risk, and they asked just for something which was 2 floors high. So it was a bit like the failure of the master plan project was given already by the program in itself. So we decided to use the possibility of build this gray space, this void, this potential void, to start to challenge the idea of the forming movement, which I am sharing with you today. And also to try to combine two kind of very opposite system in terms of housing, which is the single family house and the collective building. So we end up with a form which was literally a stock of single family house with an intersectional point which was supposed to be the structure, the pipes, the electricity, the water, everything that has to be shared. And the idea in this diagram was that the void has the same size of the plenty part, and an inhabitant that by this plenty part could use and build and have this void for free. So that was the concept. Then we start to apply to the image is very bad, no? It's quietly brightish, but we start to apply to the plot that engage a situation, and we decide that the minimum size of the void was the size of the living room, and more and more and more. So we end up with this 3D image on the competition, which was a 7-meter large building exposed in 3 directions in the street, in the courtyard, and in his own winter garden or void, which was very huge. And with this diagram showing 2050 and 2055, where people were supposed to occupy their own void. They decided that we were the winners, and then we had to spend a lot of time to build it, because obviously it was totally anti-economic, in the sense that a building that is 7 meters large with 3 facades and a void, which is not included in the price, was a challenge. So you have really to be young to do that and to spend millions of hours with. So at the end, we end up with this one, which is the resolution, and which was quite interesting, because we were able. So typology are like that. So when you have one flat, then you have one void, which has the majority, they have exactly the same size, and in the corner they have minimum 50, 60 meters square. And this is a building that has been achieved by a very simple strategy. We do not design. We just bought what was on catalog. So it was an assemblage, like an industrial process of an assemblage of what we can find on the market, which we give for the best price, the best quality. We end up the construction, as you see, it's very simple. I mean, the guardrail is a standard guardrail, the terrace is a standard terrace, the windows are standard windows, and blah, blah, blah. And all the void, they already had this sliding facade to close the void, so we don't have to ask permit if you want to build on the back of this skin. And that's very funny, because then the building was selected to the Alejandro Aravena to represent the France during the Biennale, and we were able to come back there 10 years after and to film the inhabitants and the evolution of the void, which was quite interesting as an experience that I don't want to share today because it's too long. But for an architect, you know, when you end the building, you end the story. You give the keys, and it's very rare that you go back. And in this, the potential of the void, There are people that has built another room, another kitchen, or an exterior spa or a sauna. There are people that are very, very different. The challenge of the project was to create an offer to challenge the negative identity of the place which was destroyed before. So it's a story where architecture is on the service of the creation of a new identity, and this identity brought new people. But here, for the lecture, what is interesting there that you understand that the movement of this form happened through the void. The void is the space of the changing, the void is the space of potential, but it's also an exception because you don't have void like that, you don't have the possibility of double your volume without double your surface in every project. So the second example I will show you, it's a Parisian project. It's there. It's the last district in Paris which is ongoing, let's say, which is from scratch in a certain sense, because it was a land from the SNCF, from the National Train Company, which was back to the city after the moving of few industry. And we were engaged for the competition of this. The brief, so it's these red things, which is really the opening of this district. The Renzo Piano Courthouse is there. There is a park here. There is like 1 million of very good architects that participate to this project. But the brief was that image, which for me was the opposite of Paris. I mean, this is the new generic ecological district that we are building around Europe, with a park and with different buildings made by different talented architects. And we decide to start to understand Paris. I mean, I was in love with the city. I'm totally an immigrant. I mean, I'm there, I studied there, so there is a relationship very strong between me and the city. And we start just to put words on that, starting this study that then became the Haussmann research 10 years after. And Paris, it's a very simple system, which is it's an extrusion of the ground on 27 meters high. So it's one roof, one continuous roof, except these few buildings from 60, with the same materials, stone, the same gray roof. It's a kind of monolith where the void has it's the densest city in Europe. It's the 5th dense city in the world without towers. And each void has a very strong intelligence. And it's also this city where I can show you this picture without showing you street, church, public space. You know that you are in Paris. It's kind of crazy. The housing buildings in Paris, they are the identity, the tools of the identity of the city itself. Even the roof and few other images. And this is the product of a project of architecture which was driven by different people, but the main character was Haussmann. Between 1953 and 1940, 60% of the buildings in the city were built in 60 years. And when you overlap that with the streets that were built in the same period, you can say that Paris is a kind of a new city built from scratch, except from the center, which is the middle-aged part. So it's quite impressive. This is a project of architecture that has created the densest city in the world, in Europe, the city which is extremely beautiful and which is a strong identity, and where people, in a certain sense, live well. So as an architect, we are very interested in understanding how they did it, why that works very well, and why, I won't jump that. And it's also a city where the private investor was the main center into what the city was built. Everything, what we call the Haussmannian building, is a private housing building that starts with the idea to be rented. So it's an investment. So this building you see in this picture, the 80% of them, they are just simple private investment. It's the moment where the people, the family, they can start to have loan in the bank and to welcome. And so, the figure is very interesting. It's called, in France, it's called immeuble de rapport, which means an investment building, in a building that allow me as an owner to make money. And so it's kind of crazy, and it's a figure that in 2 centuries has demonstrated that is one of the most flexible tools we have. It's a building that was conceived to be an housing, that it became office, museum, school, gallery, and then hotel, social housing. I mean, in terms of function, it's one of the most flexible figure we can have now, or we get. So we decide to, and it's also the building into what everything is built in Paris. It became a block, and then it became a, it's very nice. This is the replica of Paris in China. So the replica of Paris in China, they replicate investments building. They did the copy of an housing project, and the character, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think it's the only city in the world where the expression of the identity of the city, it's given by a private investment project. So we were interested in that, in how to be part of this very strange, specific situation in the answer of this competition. So we decide, so you can see that it's China there. So we decide to study the investment building and decide to reinterpret it in a contemporary way. And there are a few things in common of all these projects, which is the fact that the facade has been designed before the plan. So just for the story, just to know that, Haussmann was there in all the sign in the notary office saying, if you want this land, you should continue the facade of your neighborhood, you should align the slabs, you should have 50% in stone, 50% in wood, and you should buy your decoration of the facade on this catalog. It was that building by building. So the only rules Haussmann gave, it gives in this specific part of the building, which was the facade. So the facade is glazed on 50%. It's, the building is kind of very interesting because it's the height of the ground floor, it's 5 meters, then you have 2.8, 4.5, 3.3, which gives back after the standardization the fact that in the same building you can have an office on the first floor and you can live on the top floor and you can have a student housing on the first level. I mean, today when, I don't know how many of you practice, but when you build an housing, less or more, you do 3 meters slab to slab. An office is 3.6 or 3.5, but you never mix all the function and all the potential of this different function. What is nice here and what has been real in this century is the fact that normally the banks or office or lawyers, they are on the first floor and people live on this floor and the students are there. I mean, the possibility that the volume offers is very different. It's a compact building made it by the addition of catalog and pieces which are just standard. And the structure is very easy to understand. And there is this very nice things that the ground floor is connected to the first floor without using the common stairs, which means that the commercial surface of this city can double, or you can live on first floor. When McDonald's arrives, they normally buy the 2 floor, or otherwise, if it's a very small boulangerie or a bakery, you live on the first floor. So, and this, it's relevant and changed over the time. So, and it changed also, it's over the style. The 53, when Haussmann came, there was the classicism, and it was until the Art Nouveau and then the modern, you find in the investment building, despite the question of the language, exactly the same intelligence. That was already there in the section of the time where you can see how rich was the activity in this kind of the life of this space. So we try to translate that in a contemporary way, and we decide to do an office building to do an housing building. So everything it's like standardized like an office. It's 1.5 module that gives the entire grid of the office. The ground floor connect with the first floor without the common stairs. There is only 1 window in the entire building, and when you want a loggia, you move this building in the back, and all the structure, the pipes, the electricity, the solar control, everything is in the facade. Which means that if you want to change something tomorrow, you have just to relate to the exterior skin to know how to transform it. That was the competition image where we showed the office version and the housing version. And when we get over with the construction site, we get in these prefab things where everything is inside the module. So the building is literally like a Lego that was built under on prefabrication, and which gives back this specific building, which by the form of the block, it's very Parisian, because it's a triangle. I mean, the parcel was already into the language of the city. And this is today, less or more, or 5 years ago. And this, when we did that, then I called the mayor of the city and I say, we have done an Osmanian building if you want to visit it. And they came and say, why you don't do a research on the Haussmann today? And we started the adventure through that building, which even if has been conceived as a generic space, it's very interesting as an housing because it's very high. Each floor is 3.2, which is a middle cut between an office and an housing. And this was 2055, we hope. So, forms in movement. What is nice, it's that, and then I start to work in Japan, and I discovered that in Japan, the word form doesn't exist. And they have like 15 words to say form. And in function of how the movement of the form is qualified, you will find one specific word. So and then I found this book, which is kind of crazy. It's called Forms in Japan, and which classify all the forms. And every time you have a form of something, you have the specific word. So I don't know if I have image. Those are forms. So the forms for them, it's the synthetic idea between idea, materials, and purpose, which could be a diagram for a project of architecture, no? And what I like is that those are form of continuation, form of dilatation, which is called irogari, form of openness, irake, form of continuation, tsulamari, and those are just one family. Then you have form of arrangement, form of enclosure. This is very nice. It's the form that is born by encirclement, which are born by this movement. Form of emballage, form of wrapping, is a specific word that say that all the forms that are born by wrapping, they are part of this family, and blah, 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 form of fluidity, form of twisting, form of tearing, that is very nice, this is very specific, or the form of cutting is called kiri, and yeah, just I share that with you to say that there are other cultures where the function doesn't. I mean, the entire lecture is against these things where form has to follow function, and there are cultures where in reality the form has its own logic, its own intelligence, and probably its own form. And it's interesting because in the east of the world and in the Africa, we are doing another book now. The word form is really do not exist in a certain sense. So the form as we understood as mise en forme is something that came over. And you can add to that, this is very nice. I think that architecture is that, the form in architecture is something that has to go with the materials, that has to go with the techniques, with a certain ambition and a certain idea, and has to change in time and history and in climate space. So I like the fact that this diagram is already there. And so this idea of the forms in movement, I try to share with you through the intelligence of the form itself, which was the one of the Haussmannian building and also the void. But I come from the south of Italy, and I really like this image. You know, I don't know if you know the story of these things that you can, if you have visited the south of the Mediterranean in general, you find these skeletons, which are quite interesting. And for me, it's really like, it's more than the domino house of Le Corbusier. It's the essence in itself of the architecture. It's where when you build a house, at a certain point, you let the structure goes up, and that stays because the father cares about the fact that the child probably will rebuild on top of this house, the extension, in 20 years. Architecture is exactly that. It's the moment where Jean Nouvel says, architects are the one that answer to question that nobody asked for. So our job, in a certain sense, is to generate the question, to generate this specific moment that goes over the necessity, over the needs, over the fact that has to create the condition the project to exist, and then overlap that with an history that is related to future. It's the father that expects the child a day will have his own family and he will build up on the top of that. So it's an history of overchanging the structure in function of the next step. It probably comes from there. I also like the idea that in this diagram I show you how do you understand the form. It's very simple. No, when there is a bench, it's 45 centimeters high, you know that you have to sit there. When there is a table, it's 72. By the way, this is too high, but it's 72, so you know that you have to sit and do something. In buildings and cities, it's the same things. Forms, they have to be understood. And the techniques and details, which is a bit the nightmare in architecture, in a certain sense, we have to master them to make it disappear. So I really like this quote of Henri Matisse that said that we want something else, we work towards serenity through simplification of idea and form. The ensemble is our only ideal. Details lessen the purity of the line and harm the emotional intensity. We reject them. And I think that we should reject also details. Details are just there to give us the tools to make the form readable, to allow the form to be understood. That's why this is just a succession of images of few facades that we did in different buildings, but the word abstraction comes every time on the table. The idea that at certain point, techniques disappeared, scale disappeared, and the building became a pure form that has to be understood in a certain way. So this work of going really further in a very technical approach to make the technique at certain point a thematics in itself that has to disappear is something that we cherish a lot. The idea of the grid, the idea of the absence of the grid, the idea of the repetition, it's something that I think is very useful. Until the moment where the facade becomes in itself a white page where the story will be printed and will be read in another way. The other word I want to share with you, it's limit. This is a very nice picture of Ungers. And limits, I mean, we can define together the architecture as the art of limit, the art of designing the limit. It's very clear, no? When you make a line as an architect, you decide who is in, who is out, what is family, what is collectivity, what is a certain climate here, and what is the other climate. Where is cold, where is hot, where is inclusion, where is exclusion, what is house, city, territory, country, everything, it's just a succession of limits. And I think that our work is less or more the same of this child that at certain point just turn around with a line, and this magic line that allow her to say, that's my space, that's my territory. It's very scaring because we design and we decide the power of those lines. So once you see the architecture through that, every time you draw a line in a certain sense, you take a responsibility of saying, I'm excluding someone. There is someone outside. And we really get into these topics once we were confronted to a project of a prison. You know, the prison is the maximum limit in architecture, probably. It's the moment where really the expression of the limit become material through a wall. You know, the prison are or outside the city, or outside, or on an island, or outside the society, or where they are in the city, there is an expressed limit, which is a wall, which decides what is in, what is out. And literally after this wall, there is a word with its own right, with his own logic, which is different than the outside world. I'm not saying that is right or wrong. I'm not saying that put people, because it's a very like strong and political debate to understand if this kind of world could exist in 2022. But it's a fact. It's a fact that this is a non-urban project, is a non-social project, is a non-social space which is divided by the society to a very strong limit encharned by a wall. And when you see that, whatever is the history of architecture, you will find it as leitmotif when it goes to the prison. So when we did this competition, we decided to, in a certain sense, transform the wall in something else, or try to re-bring back the idea of the prison as a urban object. So we take all the minimum part of the project, of the program, that could express a wall, that could be a kind of inhabited wall, and we decide to do a facade with that. So literally, we split the program in two. What was the maximum security space, what was the average security, what is the minimum security, and we redraw the entire program to put all the space which has a different level of security, recompose a facade, and to erase the wall. In a certain sense, to create the wall as an inhabited wall that has to contain another space. And which gives back this very strange building, which honestly, it looks like whatever you want, but not a prison. And even the expression of the facade, it's a windows. It's a windows that connect the interior of the space, the courtyard, to this buffered zone, which is the one where you control everything you gain. And that space, it's in the middle of a very strange context. Obviously, they built the prison in the worst part of the city. So it's very close to council houses and with the what we call the banlieue, the peripheric. So the place in itself, it's very strange. And it looks like a meteor in this place, which has no relationship with the typological relationship, but at the same time, it's not the expression of a refuse of a dialogue. So it's a very specific dialogue that this building has with the context. In the back, there is glasses. In the front, it's curtain. You enter through these doors. And when you enter, you have this buffer zone, which now is more green than that. But there's also windows on the exterior. And then you enter here, and you enter this space, where we brought kind of a very childish, naive approach of colored space, which are relayed to other worlds which are not the prison one. Obviously, we cannot escape to that, I don't know how to say it in English, but to that. So once we did the prison, then we were into a project of a theater. I'm just taking my phone to check the hours because I can speak for days. Okay. And it is also a limit. It's also a project of a limit. It's also a project of a limit, but it's a nice story of architecture. It's the Ministry of Culture that started in '60 a program which was called Les Maisons de la Culture. So they start to build theater in all the complex districts in the different cities in France, believing that the theater was the instrument to kind of solve the social problem of a specific place. It was a great success. People get engaged in theater, and the Théâtre de Maillon, which was our client, let's say, it was part of that program at the beginning. It was successful in this district, and then they moved in another district, which was, and they give to them a building which was a fair. So nothing that has that relate to the theater. It was a very generic industrial building, and it's a nice story of architecture because starting from this building, the company of the theater start to challenge their own idea of the theater. So they become contemporary, starting from the fact they do not have a classic theater, and so they were in a certain sense, they were totally free to re-challenge their own production of theater. And it was the same moment in Europe when that happened all around Europe, where many different theaters start to confront themselves with the space that were not built as a theater at the beginning. And that literally create the beginning of what we call the contemporary theater. People like Romeo Castellucci, which are incredible. Romeo Castellucci start his careers in the Théâtre du Maillon, in a place which literally that was the stage, nothing to do with the there is even not a backstage that open on a void in the back, and the how do you call that, the seats, they have to be rebuilt every years. So even that, it was an adventure for them, which allowed them to have a very specific production, very contemporary, but also to guest things that were outside the theater. They used the courtyard. They also used the entrance of the building. There was no room, no limit anymore between what was the stage and what was the city. They built up their own box that they sprawl around the city to generate an extension of the theater into the street. So it was a very nice story, and that happened in this network in Europe, and now they are the best, let's say, in a very specific approach, which is the contemporary one, they are the best seen in Europe. This one, I don't know if there is something like that in Vienna, but I'm sure that it is. So when we arrived, they give us this image. So literally, the people from the theaters, so we were the only young team without experience in this typology. The others, they were already teams that were experienced in doing theater. When we arrived there, we spoke with the director of the theater, and he says, we don't want to move from that space. We really like our own theater, except that the city decided to build up a new theater, to destroy this one and use this land to sell it to Puma or Nike. I forget one of the two. And so they ask for something that has to be not a theater, but it has to be a theater. And for us, it was really obscure, because we do not know what was a theater, what they meant when they said we don't want a theater. So we start to do research, and that, like always, and we discovered a funny thing is that the theater is a typology since less or more 2,000 years. Before, it was a part of the landscape, part of the city. So it's an interior space since 2,000 years. In this interior space, what we call theater today, it's related to one specific typology, which, by the way, is called Italian theater. So when you name a theater, less or more, you are speaking about a proscenium theater, which means a space where you have a functional logic which is every time the same, whatever is the theater you know. You have the entrance, very open into the city. Then you have the rooms, one or more rooms. And then you have the logistic and the backstage in the back. And the proscenium, it's the limit between the creation of the illusion, so all the artists, the technician, the delivery, the stage, the light, everything happened there, and the public. So the Italian theater, or Italian proscenium, by the way, this is Palladio, it's the clear line between two worlds. It's a limit between what happened to create the illusion of the theater and what happened when you receive it. So we decide to erase this line another time and to give to them something that was not a theater. The project in the competition was called This Is Not a Theater. And we did that through the only way we can understand something that has to change, which was the reproduction of a city into a building. So the logic was this one. There was the exterior line of the city, the facade. The facade has no front, no back, no definition of or relationship with the context. It's every time the same, and this is the biggest glass that you can have in Europe and the biggest sliding doors that you can have in Europe without doing on purpose. And is also the structure, the most easiest one in terms of dimension. So this module gives back a limit where you have 20 doors. So the entrance of the building, it's in every side in function of how you manage the interior. And 20 large, when I say large, it's like, this is a man, it's 5 meters by 6 meters, very large windows. So there is no black box, no blinded part. It's the same facade everywhere. Inside what, and which is also, it was a construction site in itself. We built the facade, and in the same times, we built the room. And this is the construction site. By the way, this is huge. It's 80 meters high in one cast of concrete. It's the maximum we have done. And inside, so we built at the limit. We built 2 streets, Il Cardo e il Decumano, the foundation of the city. And then we give to them the techniques, and we give to them an instrument where all the space could be closed, acoustic, could guess techniques. So it's literally a void, one same high, and then we end up even using the exterior as a part of the theater. So all the space in that specific theater is a theater, is a scene. So there are no limits, no room, and with the same seats, because the problem is that at a certain point they have to move the seats, you can recompose different configurations. So that was what we gave to the competition, showing that it could be a frontal, a bifrontal, 3 rooms, 2 rooms, 1 room, and we gave to every time with the same seats and with the same light. Because the point is that it's very easy to say that things change if then you have to add millions of gadgets. Here it's just exactly the same red situation that moves all around the theater and create different configuration. So it was 1, 2 bifrontal room and blah, blah, blah. Then we built it. So that was the exterior line. And it's quite impressive because it looks like a very small house, but it's 20 meters high. So you can see the scale. And when you go inside, this is the courtyard, which is a very non-specific and generic space. This is open with the structure to guess the techniques, with the protected facade by the wind, by the glass. And it's a space that is a courtyard or an entrance or a space for representation, or now it's a space for installation or for performances. It's quite interesting in that sense. And you can see the scale here. So those are the walls we used. It's 15 meters high. This is a chair wall that you can open. You can open by your hand totally. And they are acoustic and they are structurally, and they have exactly the same property of a classic acoustic wall of a room. And even the signage it was just a screen, so you can change the function of the space, and you just have to write billetterie, bar, or whatever in each part. So there are nothing else than this screen. And so this is the room, the big room with the open situation, with the enclosed space when the seats moves in the other room. This is the cinema version. This is the street. Very nice. This is the large Il Decumano. And the only facade we did is the facade of these 2 streets. Even the rehearsal room is thinked as a scene. The space for artists, same things. Les loges, even the toilets, there is no limit between man, woman, or interior, exterior. And we were it was very nice because we also drew the furniture. The idea was to escape the design and give to them files that they can CNC. So it's a project which is called Make A, and then it's make a chair, make a bench, and the entire, we gave to them instruction to then assemble the space, and he gives back this chair, this table, and the entire collection. It's very, very simple. It's inspired by Enzo Mari and all the auto construction, but that allow them to if they need a chair, they just have to cut a piece of wood, which is also the rocking chair. And this is the theater where when the wall is open, and this is used as a restaurant. This is used as a bar in the night. or as a space for party. This is now the entrance, and in the room there is a representation. It was very nice because even during the COVID, this is the logistic. It's the back courtyard, which has become an amphitheater. The corridor has become a space for an exhibition or different exhibition. And even this, which is just the stairs, then become a space for a performance. It's everywhere. This is the largest smoking room in Europe, but it's also a stage for performance. And during the COVID, the theater stayed open thanks to this exterior space. That was a very nice news. So this is the logistic. Okay. 10 minutes. So this idea of limits and what engage limit with form and the determination of that space, that gives us back also in this specific moment where nature is one of the topics in each city, the possibility of challenging different figures. One is that it's an office building where we just compose two typology together. It's the greenhouses plus the office, classic office building, to decide that the office has not facade on the street, but it has facade on every time a climatic room, which is a specific climate made by the interior climate and the exterior climate. So it's a space that we do with Michel Devigne, which is even typologically, it's in between an industry, a greenhouses, and an urban object. It's a space that is in Bordeaux and other times, and those are all the office, and this is the garden down, which is an extension of the working space in a very hybrid, and it's closed in the winter, so you have your own temperature in the winter, and then everything open in the summer, and it becomes exterior. So it's a question of a limit that changes. So all these things are sliding glasses. It's the changing of the scale and the configuration of this limit that gives back a new kind of typology every time. Sometimes the design of a limit could be also the topics of the form in itself. So that's why the conference is limit of form of limits. In that project and in the next one, which are just image, by the way, there is not more to say than the form in itself. The form has become the design of a limit of the city, of a limit of the extension, of a limit of something. And through that, we gave back a new way of considering function. This is a project in Lille. Lille is a place where, when I was a student, Rem Koolhaas was doing the master plan of Lille. And it's the place that inspired the entire theory of the bigness. So the idea was very simple. There was no design of street and square or public space. The buildings are extremely big and they can absorb the changing of the program. So the entire theory of Koolhaas, where I was very fun at the time, was based on this potential of the architecture to be bigger and bigger and bigger to become district. I'm very simplifying, but the idea was that. And that was the project of Lille, and it starts when I start my architectural study. A few drawings of that, 64, nothing. And it was a project of network, in the sense that it was based on the fact that Lille was supposed to be connected to London, supposed to be connected to the entire Europe through the railway fast train. And around this station, you could build up a very dense system. So that became this district. Very strange, because the entire district is composed by 4 objects, and these 4 objects are very big. So it's 2 towers, the station, this huge platform, and then the Rem Koolhaas courthouse, which is there. But the gap between the theory and the reality was very huge, in the sense that this bigness do not allow, in a certain sense, life, except the one that was based around the train. So it was in the center of the city, but it was just a huge district, an entire commercial station or whatever. These images are very strange because there is no porosity between the ground floor and the street. There is no life in a certain sense, which is not the one of the large structure. And luckily or unluckily, we were called to build the last piece that no one's want in this district. In the sense that all the people they did the large tower, the large project. Jean Nouvel has done this very huge, and we were called as young guys to the last parcel, which was just the last that no one's bought it. So the city says, okay, we will do a project there. And it's a piece in this logic of the opportunity, the economics, and the bigness. This piece was the smallest, more complex one, with a huge responsibility because he has to end by the way, the very megalomaniac axis, which was called the Le Corbusier Avenue here. He has to be the angle piece for the station when you go out. He has to be the object that you see from the highway which goes down. So in a very small project of 4,000 meters square, 4,000 is very small, we concentrate a lot of things that in reality shaped the form. So we really played the game of designing the limit of the form through the information that we get from the context. So it was like the continuation of the highway, then a tower when you have to see from this avenue, and then a corner building or a building that has to open to the second phase of housing. And so as you can see here, it's a form which has no form. So when you see it from the axis, it's a tower. From the highway, it's an infrastructure. From the street, it's just a kind of two legs that define the ground floor. And from the station is a corner building. And then the other part, it's supposed to be lower to allow then the project that happened, which are those housing. And which gives back this kind of signal in the large scale. Even the facade is designed like that without any functional logic. We just end up like a periscope looking at the city and highlighting the interesting part of the city. So it's literally a succession of large windows in 4 different kind of structure, which gives back that. And what is nice that by designing that as a form, which is also the main logic of this new project we just ended the last week, that's why I won't share it with you, which is literally a wall, inhabitant wall to end up one phase of urbanizing part to give a facade to the river in Rennes and to open up what will be the continuation of the city through a very strange program. So it's that. Through this, the first one I showed you in Rennes, what is nice is the fact that by the changing of the form, that offer to the district very different kind of workspace. So it's all the first 3 levels is Samsung, then there are a small startup on the top because it's only 300 meters square. So the idea that probably through a different approach of the form, we can generate different uses. It's something that we can challenge sometimes. Here, this is a fire station. It's a place where the 2 numbers that are there is the number that you call when you need a fire, when you have fire in your house. And this is the tools into what we had to design, in a certain sense, the new phases of the city and also the phase of this river. So it's a very abstract project where the facade is the same, even if it contains an office building there. There is a gymnasium here. There is all the logistic in the back, and it's literally in between an infrastructure, a river facade, and an office building. That's the scale. This is the inside with the tower to do the exercise. The roof, the cars that give the scale of the building. This is an interior of an office, but is also the interior of the gymnasium, or the interiors of the this figure is the one where you go down when there is a fire. And that's all. Thank you. My son, every time I do that, chi è? Chi è?
So, I can imagine there are some questions in the audience. Not yet, but they will come. So I have to ask a first question, obviously. At the very beginning of your presentation, you said that any act of architecture is a political act. This was one statement, so we are creating a vision of a good future as a political statement. And then sometime in your lecture you mentioned Jean Nouvel saying architects are giving solutions to problems nobody had asked for. If you bring these two things together, are you optimistic or pessimistic that you're being heard by the clients with your political statements?
Anyway, I hope that it has been clear, this expression of Jean Nouvel, because it's about highlighting the key point that drive after all the decision-making process. It's even more important of the design part. So for me, an architect is this kind of archaeologist of the future. It's an archaeologist of his own wished future, where you rise pieces and you say, okay, that's the direction we have to go. So the way you generate question, it's even more important than the way you solve it. Is that something that you can share with the clients? Sometimes.
I think you're very lucky with your clients.
Some of them, others are horrible. But no, the idea is that in general, architects are... the fact that a project exists, it's only because he has been at certain moment shared and communicated. So communication and architecture, communication allow, the way we master the communication, allow architecture to exist. And we have different tools to explain step by step our idea. Drawings is part of that. And even the different scale of the drawings, they have different audience. You know, details only speak with engineers. Sketch can be showed to a major. So the idea of how you engage everyone in your own boat or in their own boat, because sometimes you just drive the boat, but it's not yours. It's very important. So, and it's very important also to hide parts. So what we do in LAN, it's that, first of all, we do a statement at the beginning of whatever is the experience, is there are no dogma, and we don't have all the answer. So the guys look at you like, if you don't have the answer, who has the answer? I don't know. And this idea of I don't know, that's dubbed as an instrument, it's very important. So once you are in that pedagogy, that open up a lot of possibility with the clients, because you try to challenge each topics that you estimate important in a way where you say, okay, let's find together, even if it's you that find the answer, let's find together the right answer. So this process of engaging everyone in a non-dogmatic approach, it's the only way we found until now to sometimes challenge figures which are already established.
Figures in the sense of architectural figures?
See, architectural figure.
Okay. Please, Artem.
Probably now you can hear better. In your presentation, you spoke a lot about standards, and my question probably would be, how critical should it be about the standards, which I know probably it's clear that you have to be critical. Let me ask another question. You presented your work in a very rational way, that you just extract things from the context or from the same regulations or from the standards, and then just receive the project which you receive. But I want to ask, which role plays, let's say, irrational part, or let's say intuition in your mind? Like what appears?
It's a total manipulation what I do, but no, it's a real. I mean, the project.
I know that's why I'm asking.
The way projects are created or projects are discovered, because sometimes it's more question of getting deeper to discover the project that was missing in this specific place. I like this idea that, you know, you go and you search for the form that you have just to find. But so the way you get there, it's very rational. Sometimes it's rational, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's, there is no a linear path. The way you present it has to be less or more linear. And then the things become linear after. Once you get, when we do competition, for example, we ask to all the team to do not draw or design before we put words on intention. So the first phase of the let's say the genesis of a project are made it on dialogues where we don't sketch, we don't give image. We just put words and then that reframe the condition into what you are searching for forms. So in this process, believe me, nothing is rational. I mean, words comes and sometimes the same words is understood in a very different, especially with people that do not speak the same language. It's kind of chaotic. But I like the idea that what you call context contain the word text. So it's a narrative, it's a text that you've read on the reality, choosing that something is more important than other things. And that's the difference between an architect and another architect. It's the fact that at certain point you decide that this part of the reality, it's the one that we generate or will drive or your decision. So that's art. We refuse to use the word in architecture, but the only artistic part of this job is this interpretation of the reality. Is the interpretation you gave to the world around you, to small pieces that you find on left and right, and we will motivate and will justify all your choice. Otherwise, it's not interesting. I mean, otherwise, it's pure engineering, or it's pure programming, or it's just a very well done building. But architecture is this moment where that transcends through a reading in a very confused way, or in a very clear way for some other people, which is not me, the reality. And I don't know if it's clear, but it was not proposed to be clear.
It was clear.
So you believe or you count on intuition and imagination?
My problem is that my students are there. So whatever I say is not real for you.
It was no trick question from my side.
Can you repeat the question? I was.
Do you believe in intuition and imagination as part of our work, as you described it? So you're talking about
for sure. I mean, there is. I think each of us has done this experience of sometimes you search for hours and then you go and you sleep, and in the night you see your project, and then the day after you wake up, you go in the office and say it's dead. I mean, this is a situation. So yeah, for sure there is something where the addition of information in our process, which are very huge, has to be. You have to relate to that. It's happened especially when you are youngest than me in terms of practice. At the beginning of my careers, it was very, very based on intuition. That sometimes we did things without even putting words on things. And it was just a part of the brain that has interpreted faster than the one that gives you word, the same reality. So obviously, but that happened to everyone. Sometimes you are convinced of it's like that, and you don't know why.
Thanks a lot. Great lecture. I'm starting with the presumption that I really admire how you were able to create a body of work which becomes stronger and stronger, and starting from the theoretical question which you had at the beginning, which was the Aldo Rossi quote. If you look at, for example, the building Aldo Rossi did in Paris, which were a question of typology and were quite pittoresque and quite banal in his body of work, if you compare it with the power of abstraction which was able to rise in the cemetery. But you went with a way of abstraction, and you came with the idea of the detail which is not important, the body which is creating the relation to size. So this is very similar to that what Donat wanted to do with his sculpture, no? If you go to Marfa, until you are not as a body there, you don't understand how big a table is or whatever. And in that question, there's two putting together. So on one side, your building which you did in Paris, which was before your study, no? You said it was Haussmannian in a certain way. And I found it very triggering and intriguing that you took of Haussmann everything out. You put the facade question out of it, but you went to the core question of technique, no? Everything, you have this very naked, resilient body, and you put all the techniques there. Would you change, afterwards you went into this kind of research. You showed the research before, but biographically you made the research afterwards. And then you were showing us pictures of Paris, where you were saying, I would recognize Paris just by the fragments. I'm not sure if I would recognize Paris by your building right now, but maybe that's also the truth of our time, that we have become European cities, and the cities which we are creating are based on European details. The theater is based on the biggest European door, the biggest European window, etc. So my question would be, how do you ground them? How would your architecture be grounded in time and space? And what space is it where it is grounded? And would you remake the Paris building differently after you made the research, and what would your question be?
No, it's for sure. I think one of the most, it's a very, very good observation and a very good question, and it's probably the limit of the exercise of this building was the fact that in the frame of the identity, it doesn't give back the same. I mean, we took Haussmann under the idea of the flexibility and the tectonic and the resiliency and the potential of the structure more than the identity. But today I'm very, very, I'm very into that question. The question of how you bridge how you make the bridge between the identity of the collectivity and the society and into what you can translate that in architecture. And so for sure I will not do if the building was today, I would approach it differently, keeping the same intelligence in the form. But it's a very, very complex question. It's a complex question that the generic approach we had, which is also issued by the modern culture, in a certain sense, this idea of the machine. The limit of this approach, but the limit probably of our generation, or even the European project, is this question. It's the question of how you make this strong link between the inhabitant and the place. And this is something that we are really challenging now. I didn't show the Strasbourg project, which is a bit picturesque, very colored, etc., but it's crazy in terms of efficiency when you take it in the angle of the identity. People that lives there, in only 2 years, COVID included, they feel they are part of this neighborhood, and this neighborhood is a part of the identity of the city, just because we used 6 colors, which is kind of crazy as a tools. So which are the instruments that architecture has to establish this link or to continue an identity or to redraw a new one? For me, it's the question of now. It's the question of now with the aims of including ecology and the sociology into the same research. So for sure, and I don't have the answer because honestly, I'm getting crazy. We are proposing now a project for the French pavilion for the Biennale based on this idea of identity, inclusion, exclusion, but even in the languages and in the vocabulary. And honestly, it's crazy. So the idea probably of the local, it's the one piece that can really help us to re-establish strong link between the construction and the culture. So it's the doors into what you know, in this black project, nothing is local, if you want. If we are to re-establish today, I would probably do that in stone. I would probably do that with the Parisian stone. And I would push further the idea that probably sometimes the materials or details could continue a landscape, a cultural landscape in through architecture. So no, but it's a very good question.
Thank you very much for your fantastic
Where are the ornament?
yeah, presentation. I would like to ask you a personal question in relation to the what do you think about theory is what is the relationship between your making architecture and the theory? Because it seems to me that there are some architects that started making theories and then they later, in their later stage of life, they built. You had this fantastic trajectory of having the chance to build very young. And to me, it seems that your theories are really starting from this very fruitful experience of making. So how you balance the making and the theoretical energy that you put inside the things that you are doing. It's a theory getting bigger in terms of relevance in your work, or it's something that is stable?
In reality, the word theory is a bit scaring. Like theory is also a bit dogmatic. You know, like a theory is something that you establish and is there, etc. This probably theoretical research or just research, it's every time related to the. In reality, we use the project as a doors that open up on certain. Field of interest that then we push through the research. So it's a loop where the built act or the practice gives us some thematics, topics or challenge that then they have to be understood through a theoretical approach or a research which is more based in it's very complex because even just the knowledge of the discipline, architecture, it's has its own history, has its own. It's an amazing field of invention, and sometimes just the knowledge of that part. You know, when you draw windows, to do not reinvent the world, just to research about the window that has been done. It's already taking a lot of time. So this idea of challenging everything through the understanding of what has been done before us and what we can change or what we can base on our reflection to push further is something that I'm very interested because in architecture it's a Pandora box. You open one, and then you have another one, and then you have another one. You know, this identity question, for example, that now is something that I refused for years, and now I feel that I'm ready to go in that field. Probably it's wrong, but it's a passionate word because architecture is also doors into what you discover, the world around you, the people around you, and so we push further and further that part.
First of all, thanks. So it's more a project specific question, but on your first project that you shown in Bordeaux, you got the master plan and you kind of had the idea to do like a structure, and you had infills and voids. I could imagine that at some point in your design process you had the idea of it being interchangeable or transformative in a way, so you could create the void or remove it and put a wall there to make another room. Was that the case, or at least, yeah, it seemed to me that you might have had the idea, and why didn't, and if so,
I mean,
why?
honestly, in this project we were quickly disenchanted. So we cut our brain very quick, because it was at the beginning it was an impossible equation. That once we gained the competition, we won the competition, on the table it was impossible to build it. So the entire effort we did at the beginning was just to allow those voids to exist and to find the money to build it in a budget which do not change. So we do not fly very high, but we stayed where we stayed, and we said to ourselves, okay, let's figure that. And it was amazing as an experience, because we learned the logic of the economy in the construction, which is kind of crazy. You know, we built it as a students. We said to ourselves, okay, let's make everything prefabricated. We did it as a parking with column and slabs, and then you have all the panels which are the same, and by the fact that they are the same, no. Then we discovered that in reality there is a lot of money in the construction which goes in the intermediary. People that do not work, but they give service to the construction. So at the end, the guys that make the electricity, he work for someone, that work for someone, that work for someone, that work for someone, and everyone you go up on this chain, you have 10%, 10, 20, 30%. So we were go to searching the guys that did directly the electricity. So at the end, we work with 80 different enterprise for this building. So it was a kind of nightmare that do not allow us to think about do we change or not. We were very focused on the construction, because the purpose was already enough ambitious.
Thanks.
I'm disappointing you.
It's okay, we can do it.
Nothing behind it, it's a tape on it. So this place is unventilated, and your CO2 levels must be getting quite high. This said, I think...
Before we leave, did someone has one Marlboro Light?
Yes, please, just when you leave the place, this is the Marlboro Light box. Just drop them. So thank you very much again. And